Peter Collins stood in the command center of the Earth Defense Force headquarters and watched the incoming transmission with growing concern. The message had traveled across hundreds of light years and contained a desperate plea for help from the Verdani homeworld. Their peaceful civilization was about to be destroyed by the advancing Zephyrian war machine, and they had nowhere else to turn. The transmission was fragmentary and filled with interference, but the meaning was clear. Zephyrian battle fleets had surrounded the Kepler system and were demanding complete surrender. The Verdani had no military forces capable of resisting such an overwhelming attack. Their entire species faced extinction unless someone intervened on their behalf. Rebecca Stone analyzed the transmission data in her laboratory and confirmed what everyone already suspected. The Zephyrian Empire had grown far beyond anything the old Galactic Council could have imagined. They now controlled nearly half of the known galaxy and were expanding rapidly. Their fleets numbered in the tens of thousands, and their technology had advanced considerably since humanity's quarantine began. But what concerned Rebecca most was the tactical analysis embedded in the Verdani transmission. The Zephyrians were not just conquering territory. They were systematically exterminating entire species and harvesting their worlds for resources. The Empire had become a devouring machine that consumed everything in its path. If left unchecked, it would eventually spread across the entire galaxy. Alan Roberts convened an emergency session of the Solar Defense Council. Representatives from all human settlements gathered through their biological communication networks to discuss the crisis. The debate was intense but brief. Everyone understood that this was the moment they had been preparing for. Humanity would emerge from isolation to face the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. The decision to intervene was unanimous, but the method was hotly debated. Some argued for a massive show of force that would demonstrate human superiority and end the conflict quickly. Others preferred a more subtle approach that would minimize the risk of galactic panic. In the end, they chose a middle path that balanced intimidation with restraint. Troy Anderson was selected to command the first human fleet to leave the Sol system in 200 years. His battle group consisted of 12 vessels that incorporated the most advanced technology humanity had developed. Each ship was a hybrid of biological and mechanical systems that could adapt to changing conditions in real time. They were crewed by humans who had undergone extensive biological modifications. The modifications allowed the crew members to interface directly with their ships and share consciousness across the entire fleet. They could coordinate their actions with perfect precision and react to threats faster than any conventional military force. Most importantly, they could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality in ways that would seem impossible to outside observers. Chris Bennett served as Troy's second-in-command and piloted the flagship of the small fleet. The vessel was named Freedom's Edge, and it embodied everything humanity had learned during their isolation. It could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously and travel faster than light without using conventional wormhole technology. Its weapons could strike targets across vast distances by manipulating space and time. The journey to the Kepler system took only days using the new reality manipulation drives. The fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system and immediately began scanning for Zephyrian forces. What they found exceeded their worst expectations. Nearly 1,000 enemy ships surrounded the Verdani homeworld and were preparing for a final assault. Rita Hayes commanded the intelligence-gathering operation and used advanced sensors to analyze the Zephyrian fleet composition. The enemy ships were massive and heavily armed, but their technology was surprisingly primitive. They relied on brute force rather than sophistication, and their crews showed no evidence of biological enhancement. They were essentially unchanged from the species humanity had encountered centuries ago. The Zephyrians detected the arrival of the human fleet, but could not identify the unknown vessels. Their sensors registered impossible readings that suggested the ships existed in multiple locations simultaneously. The alien commanders were confused and uncertain how to respond to this unprecedented situation. Kevin Murphy coordinated the tactical analysis from his position aboard the command ship. The Zephyrian fleet was powerful, but it was also predictable. Their battle formations followed standard patterns that had been used for thousands of years. They showed no creativity or adaptability in their approach to warfare. This gave the human fleet a tremendous advantage despite being vastly outnumbered. The first contact with the Zephyrian Empire came when their fleet commander demanded identification from the unknown vessels. Frank Jackson responded with a simple message that would reshape galactic politics forever. He announced that humanity had returned to claim their place among the stars, and demanded that the Zephyrian forces withdraw immediately. The response was immediate and violent. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire with everything they had, and launched thousands of missiles at the human vessels. The barrage was so intense that it should have vaporized any known ship design, but the human vessels simply phased out of normal space and allowed the weapons to pass harmlessly through their positions. Steve Patterson coordinated the defensive maneuvers and marveled at how easily their ships avoided the enemy attack. The Zephyrians were fighting a three-dimensional battle, while humans operated in dozens of dimensions simultaneously. It was like watching children throw rocks at ghosts. Nothing the aliens did could touch the human fleet. The counterattack was swift and devastating. Human weapons reached across space and time to strike Zephyrian ships before they could react. Entire squadrons vanished as reality warped around them and crushed their hulls. The aliens had never encountered anything like it, and their formations began to collapse in panic. Karen Phillips monitored the battle from her command center on Earth and felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Humanity had achieved something extraordinary during their isolation, but they were using that achievement to kill other sapient beings. The technology that could have brought peace to the galaxy was instead being used as a weapon of war. But there was no choice. The Zephyrian Empire had to be stopped before it consumed everything in the galaxy. The peaceful approach had been tried and it had failed. Now humanity would use their advanced technology to restore order through superior force. It was not the future anyone had hoped for, but it was the future that circumstances demanded. Helen Murphy worked frantically to coordinate humanitarian aid for the Verdani civilians on the planet below. Human medical teams were already preparing to assist the survivors of the Zephyrian occupation. The aliens had enslaved millions of Verdani and used them as forced labor in their resource extraction operations. Many of the survivors would need extensive treatment to recover from their ordeal. Amy Carter led the Biological Warfare Division and deployed weapons that targeted Zephyrian genetics specifically. The weapons were designed to incapacitate rather than kill, but they were completely effective against the alien physiology. Entire ship crews fell unconscious as the biological agents spread through their vessels. It was warfare conducted on a molecular level that the Zephyrians could not comprehend or counter. The battle lasted only hours, but its impact would be felt across the galaxy for centuries to come. The Zephyrian fleet was completely destroyed or captured with minimal human casualties. More importantly, the engagement demonstrated that humanity now possessed technology that made them the dominant force in known space. The balance of power had shifted permanently as the human fleet secured the Kepler system and began rescue operations on the Verdani. Homeworld word of the battle spread rapidly across galactic communication networks. Every species in the galaxy learned that humanity had returned, and that they had brought with them weapons and abilities that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The quarantine was over and nothing would ever be the same again. 60 years had passed since the quarantine began, and Ben Rodriguez could barely recognize the world he had grown up in. He stood in the command center of New Sydney, a city that existed 3 kilometers beneath the Pacific Ocean. The massive complex stretched for hundreds of kilometers in all directions and housed over 2 million people. It was one of 12 underground cities that now dotted the planet. The surface world continued much as it always had, but the real heart of human civilization now beat underground. Ben walked through corridors carved from solid rock and marveled at what his species had accomplished. When the aliens cut them off from the galaxy, humans had been forced to look inward for solutions. The results exceeded everyone's wildest dreams. Amy Carter emerged from her laboratory complex deep in the heart of New Sydney. She had spent the last 30 years developing biotechnology that merged living organisms with mechanical systems. Her latest creation was a plant that could process raw ore into pure metals, while simultaneously producing oxygen and water. The aliens had always separated biology from technology, but humans saw no reason to maintain that distinction. The breakthrough that changed everything came 15 years ago when Amy discovered that human consciousness could interface directly with organic computers. While working on a project to enhance plant intelligence, she accidentally made contact with the experimental network. The connection was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She could feel the thoughts of every plant in the system and they could sense her intentions. This discovery led to the development of hybrid systems that were part biological and part mechanical. Human operators could link their minds directly to these networks and control them through pure thought. The aliens used external devices to communicate with their technology, but humans had learned to become one with their machines. It was a completely new form of existence that no other species in the galaxy possessed. Paul Davis had used this new technology to revolutionize construction and manufacturing. His teams of human operators could control thousands of robotic systems simultaneously through their biological interfaces. They built the underground cities in record time and with precision that would have been impossible using traditional methods. Each operator was like a conductor directing an orchestra of machines. The asteroid mining operations were equally impressive. Steve Patterson commanded a fleet of ships that could strip an entire asteroid down to its component atoms in a matter of hours. The human crews interfaced directly with their vessels and could feel every vibration and stress point. They navigated through asteroid fields with an intuitive understanding that no computer could match. The resources from these operations funded projects that seemed like pure fantasy. Karen Phillips oversaw the construction of massive energy collectors that orbited the sun and beamed power back to Earth using focused microwave transmission. The collectors were so efficient that Earth now had access to more energy than entire alien civilizations. Chris Bennett worked on the most secretive project of all. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, his team was developing a faster-than-light drive that operated on completely different principles from alien technology. While other species used wormholes to travel between stars, humans were learning to manipulate space and time directly. Their ships could exist in multiple locations simultaneously and arrive at their destination before they had even left. The drive worked by creating localized distortions in reality itself. A human pilot would interface with the ship's biological components and guide it through layers of space-time that aliens never knew existed. The technology was so advanced that it appeared to violate the basic laws of physics. But humans had learned that the universe was far stranger and more flexible than anyone had imagined. Helen Murphy's research teams had solved problems that had stumped galactic civilization for thousands of years. They developed materials that were stronger than anything in known space and energy sources that could power entire star systems. Most importantly, they learned to work in harmony with natural forces rather than fighting against them. The fusion reactors that powered their civilization were based on principles borrowed from living cells. Instead of containing fusion reactions through brute force, humans learned to guide them using biological processes. The reactors were self-repairing and could adapt to changing conditions. They produced no waste and actually improved their efficiency over time. Rita Hayes commanded the most ambitious project yet attempted by any species in the galaxy. Her teams were constructing a massive structure around the entire solar system that would collect energy from the sun and channel it into their various projects. The structure was invisible to outside observation because it operated in dimensions that most aliens could not perceive. The construction project employed millions of workers, both human and artificial. The artificial workers were not robots in the traditional sense, but hybrid beings that combined human consciousness with mechanical bodies. These beings could survive in the vacuum of space and work for years without rest. They were extensions of human will, rather than separate entities. Frank Jackson served as the coordinator between all the various projects. His job was to ensure that humanity's rapid advancement did not outpace their wisdom. The mistakes that led to their quarantine could not be repeated. Every new technology was carefully evaluated for its potential impact on human society and on any future contact with alien civilizations. The underground cities had become centers of learning and culture that rivaled anything in galactic space. Artists worked with living sculptures that grew and changed over time. Musicians composed symphonies that interfaced directly with the listener's nervous system. Writers created stories that could be experienced as if the reader was actually living them. Kevin Murphy's engineering teams had solved the problem of sustainable growth. The underground cities could expand indefinitely without damaging the surface ecosystem. They developed closed-loop systems where every waste product became raw material for something else. Nothing was discarded and everything had a purpose. The most remarkable achievement was not technological but social. Humans had learned to work together in ways that aliens thought impossible. The chaos and unpredictability that had made them dangerous in galactic society became strengths when properly channeled. They could adapt to changing situations faster than any other species and find creative solutions to problems that seemed impossible. Alan Roberts often stood in the central plaza of New Sydney and watched the daily life of the underground city. Children played in parks filled with bioluminescent plants while their parents worked on projects that would reshape the galaxy. These people had never seen the stars except through telescopes, but they were building technology that would allow humanity to claim its place among them. The quarantine was supposed to contain humanity and prevent them from disrupting galactic civilization. Instead, it had given them the time and freedom to become something unprecedented. They were no longer the crude and violent species that had been banished from the stars. They had evolved into something extraordinary, and when they finally returned to the galaxy, nothing would ever be the same. Steve Patterson floated in the command sphere of his vessel and felt the pulse of the massive construction project that surrounded him. Through his neural interface, he could sense every component of the structure being built around the Sol system. Millions of hybrid workers moved through space like schools of fish, building something that defied all known engineering principles. The project had been underway for 50 years and was nearing completion. The structure existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. To any outside observer, it would appear that the Sol system was empty, except for the planets and the quarantine barrier. But humans had learned to work in layers of reality that other species could not perceive. The construction took place in folded space where distances could be compressed and materials could exist in impossible configurations. Karen Phillips guided her consciousness through the biological networks that controlled the construction. Her awareness expanded across light years as she coordinated the placement of energy collectors and processing stations. Each component was grown rather than built using technology that combined human DNA with exotic matter. The resulting structures were alive in ways that alien science could not understand. The energy output from the completed system would exceed anything in the known galaxy. The collectors were designed to harvest not just solar radiation, but also quantum fluctuations from the vacuum of space itself. They would tap into the fundamental forces that held the universe together and channel that power into human civilization. It was technology that bordered on the impossible, but humans had learned that the universe had no fixed limits. Chris Bennett piloted the first test flight of their revolutionary, faster-than-light drive. His consciousness merged with the ship's biological components as he prepared to make the jump. The ship existed in normal space, but it was also present in dozens of parallel dimensions where the laws of physics operated differently. He could feel the fabric of reality bending around the vessel as it prepared to move. The jump lasted only seconds, but Chris traveled further than any human had ever gone. He emerged from hyperspace near Alpha Centauri and immediately began scanning for signs of alien activity. The system was empty, but he could detect the energy signatures of ships that had passed through decades earlier. The galaxy beyond the quarantine barrier was still active and still dangerous. When Chris returned to Sol, he brought with him data that confirmed what many had suspected. The galaxy had not remained static during humanity's absence. New empires had risen and old ones had fallen. Wars had been fought and entire species had vanished. The peaceful civilization that had quarantined Earth no longer existed. In its place was something far more violent and unpredictable. Helen Murphy analyzed the data in her laboratory beneath the Antarctic ice. The readings showed clear evidence of massive fleet movements and planetary bombardments. Entire star systems had been stripped of resources and left as empty shells. The Galactic Council that had once maintained order was now just a memory. In their absence, aggressive species had filled the power vacuum. The Zephyrian Empire had expanded far beyond their original territory and now controlled nearly a quarter of the known galaxy. They had enslaved dozens of species and turned entire worlds into factory planets. Their technology was crude compared to what humans had developed, but they made up for it with sheer numbers and brutality. They crushed any opposition through overwhelming force. Frank Jackson coordinated intelligence-gathering operations using stealth probes that could observe alien activity without being detected. The probes were built from living tissue that could adapt and camouflage itself. They slipped through alien sensor networks like ghosts and transmitted their findings back to Earth through quantum entanglement. The intelligence they gathered painted a grim picture. The galaxy was in chaos. Trade routes that had operated for millennia were now battlefields. Species that had lived in peace for thousands of years were being hunted to extinction. The delicate balance that had kept galactic civilization stable was completely gone. But the most disturbing discovery was that the aliens had stagnated technologically. Without human unpredictability to challenge their assumptions, they had fallen into rigid patterns of thinking. Their technology had barely advanced in 2 centuries while humanity had leaped far ahead. The species that had once seemed impossibly advanced now appeared primitive by comparison. Rebecca Stone worked in the deep space monitoring station on Pluto and tracked the movements of alien fleets beyond the barrier. Her enhanced senses could detect ships at distances that should have been impossible. The biological augmentations that all humans now possessed allowed them to perceive reality in ways that natural evolution had never intended. Through her monitoring, Rebecca discovered that several alien species were actively searching for Earth. They had heard rumors of the quarantined system and wanted to investigate what had become of humanity. Some were driven by scientific curiosity, but others had more sinister motives. They saw the isolated system as an easy target for conquest. The Crystalline Collective had sent probes to test the strength of the quarantine barrier. The probes were destroyed by automated defenses, but not before they transmitted valuable data back to their creators. The aliens now knew that something extraordinary was hidden behind the energy field. They just could not determine what it was. Alan Roberts convened the Solar Defense Council to address the growing external threats. Representatives from all the underground cities and space habitats gathered in the council chambers on Luna. The meeting was conducted through biological interfaces that allowed perfect communication between all participants. Every thought and emotion was shared instantly across the network. The council faced a difficult decision. They could remain hidden behind the quarantine barrier and hope that the alien conflicts would pass them by, or they could reveal themselves and risk everything in an attempt to restore order to the galaxy. The debate raged for hours as different factions argued for different approaches. Rita Hayes argued for immediate action. Her intelligence networks had detected distress signals from peaceful species that were being exterminated by aggressive empires. Every day they delayed meant millions more deaths. Humanity had a moral obligation to intervene even if it meant revealing their advanced technology. Kevin Murphy disagreed and believed they should wait until their preparations were complete. The construction project was nearly finished, but there were still critical systems that needed to be tested. If they revealed themselves too early, they might not have the strength to deal with the consequences. They needed more time to prepare. Troy Anderson commanded the first battle group of ships equipped with the new reality manipulation technology. His vessels could phase in and out of normal space and attack from dimensions that aliens could not perceive. They were essentially invisible and invulnerable to conventional weapons, but they were also untested in actual combat conditions. The debate was settled when long-range sensors detected a massive Zephyrian fleet moving toward a system inhabited by the peaceful Verdani. The Verdani had been among the few alien species that had opposed humanity's quarantine. They had argued for understanding and patience rather than punishment. Now they were about to be wiped out for their resources. The council voted unanimously to intervene. It was time for humanity to return to the galaxy. But this time they would not return as supplicants seeking acceptance. They would return as the most advanced civilization in known space, with technology that seemed like magic to other species. The quarantine that was meant to contain them had instead forged them into something extraordinary. Amy Carter prepared the biological systems that would support the first contact mission. The ships that would carry humanity back to the stars were living entities that could think and adapt on their own. They were extensions of human consciousness that could operate independently when needed. The aliens had never encountered anything like them. As the fleet prepared to depart, Steve Patterson looked back at the Sol system one last time. The massive construction project was now complete, and Earth was protected by defenses that could repel any conceivable attack. They had built something truly extraordinary during their 2 centuries of isolation. Now it was time to show the galaxy what humanity had become. Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of Luna Station and watched the last alien ship disappear into the void. The massive vessel belonged to the Galactic Council, and it carried with it the final verdict for humanity. Earth was now officially cut off from the rest of the galaxy. Jake pressed his hand against the cold metal wall and felt the vibrations as the energy barriers came online around the entire Sol system. 200 years of isolation had just begun. The decision had not been made lightly. 3 years ago, human explorers had made contact with the Vexari Trade Federation on the outer rim of known space. What should have been a simple diplomatic meeting turned into a disaster when Captain Roy Gibson misunderstood their greeting ritual. The humans thought they were being welcomed, but the Vexari saw it as a declaration of war. Within hours, 3 different alien species were mobilizing their fleets, and the entire sector was on the brink of total war. It took months of careful negotiation to prevent billions of deaths. The Galactic Council finally managed to broker peace, but the damage was done. Humanity had proven once again that they were too dangerous to be allowed free movement among the stars. Their unpredictable nature and tendency toward violence made them a threat to galactic stability. The vote was unanimous. Earth would be quarantined. Lisa Campbell had argued against the decision in front of the entire Galactic Assembly. She stood before representatives of 47 different species and pleaded for understanding. Humans were not naturally violent, she insisted. They were explorers and builders who wanted nothing more than to find their place among the stars. But her words fell on deaf ears. The decision was final. The energy barrier that now surrounded their solar system was unlike anything humans had ever seen. It was created by technology so advanced that their best scientists could barely understand how it worked. The barrier allowed light and radio waves to pass through, but nothing else. No ship could enter or leave. No physical communication could take place with the outside galaxy. They were completely alone. Jake turned away from the window and walked through the corridors of Luna Station. The facility had been built 50 years ago as humanity's first major outpost beyond Earth. It was supposed to be the stepping stone to the stars. Now it would serve as their prison guard tower. The irony was not lost on him. In the command center, Ben Rodriguez was coordinating the evacuation of all human personnel from alien space. There were nearly 10,000 humans scattered across the galaxy, working as traders, diplomats, and researchers. All of them had to return home before the barrier became fully operational. The alien governments had given them exactly 72 hours to gather their people and leave. The evacuation ships were already arriving at the outer edge of the barrier. Jake watched on the main display as transport after transport passed through the energy field. Each ship carried humans who would never see the galaxy again. Many of them had spent their entire adult lives working among the aliens. They had friends and colleagues, and in some cases families on distant worlds. All of that was gone now. Amy Carter was one of the last to return. She had been working on Kepler 442b, studying the native plant life with a team of Zephyrian scientists. Her research was groundbreaking and could have led to major advances in agriculture and medicine, but now her work would remain unfinished. The aliens would continue without her, and humans would never benefit from what she had learned. Paul Davis met Amy at the docking bay when her ship arrived. He had been her research partner for nearly a decade, and they had planned to spend the rest of their careers exploring the galaxy together. Now they found themselves trapped in their home system, with no hope of ever leaving. Paul tried to comfort Amy, but she was devastated. 20 years of work had been thrown away because of one diplomatic mistake. The news feeds from Earth were full of anger and despair. Protests erupted in major cities as people demanded action from their governments. Some groups called for military resistance against the quarantine, but that was impossible. Human technology was centuries behind what the aliens possessed. Their most advanced warships were like toys compared to the vessels that enforced the barrier. Other groups blamed Captain Gibson for the entire situation. Death threats were made against him, and his family had to be placed in protective custody. Gibson himself had not spoken publicly since the incident. The weight of condemning his entire species to isolation was crushing him. Jake had served with Gibson years ago and knew he was a good man who had made an honest mistake. Karen Phillips addressed the Global Assembly from the United Nations building in New York. As the Secretary General, she had to find a way to keep humanity united in the face of this crisis. Her speech was broadcast to every corner of Earth and to all the stations and colonies throughout the solar system. She spoke of resilience and determination. She reminded everyone that humans had always found a way to survive and thrive no matter what challenges they faced. The quarantine would not break them, she declared. Instead, it would make them stronger. They would use this time to advance their own technology and build a better society. When the aliens finally decided to lift the barrier, humanity would emerge as a civilization worthy of respect and admiration. Her words were inspiring, but many people wondered if they would live to see that day. Helen Murphy was already making plans. As the head of Earth's largest research consortium, she commanded resources that could be redirected toward new projects. The quarantine meant they could no longer rely on alien technology or assistance. Every problem would have to be solved by human ingenuity. She saw this as an opportunity rather than a limitation. The barrier was now fully operational. Jake returned to the observation deck and looked out at the energy field that surrounded their system. It was invisible to the naked eye, but he knew it was there. Beyond that barrier lay a galaxy full of wonders that he would never see. But perhaps Karen Phillips was right. Perhaps this was not the end, but the beginning of something extraordinary. The news of humanity's return spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Rita Hayes monitored the communication networks from her intelligence station and watched as every major civilization struggled to understand what had happened at Kepler. The impossible had occurred. The quarantined species had not only survived their isolation, but had emerged as the most powerful force in known space. The Crystalline Collective was the first to respond officially. Their crystalline forms vibrated with frequencies that indicated extreme agitation as they debated how to handle this unprecedented situation. For 2 centuries, they had assumed that humanity was slowly dying behind their quarantine barrier. Instead, the humans had been building technology that made their own achievements look primitive. Kevin Murphy led the diplomatic team that made first contact with the reformed Galactic Assembly. The old Galactic Council had collapsed decades ago when the Zephyrian Empire began its expansion. In its place was a loose confederation of species that struggled to maintain any semblance of order in the face of increasing chaos. They desperately needed help, but were terrified of what humanity might demand in return. The Assembly convened on the neutral world of Nexus Prime, where representatives from 43 different species gathered to witness humanity's first official address to the galactic community in 200 years. Frank Jackson stood before the assembled delegates and delivered a speech that would be remembered for millennia. He spoke of humanity's journey during their isolation and their desire to bring peace to a galaxy torn apart by war. But Frank also made it clear that humanity would not accept a return to the old ways. The species that had once banished them from the stars were now the weaker party. Humans possessed technology that could reshape reality itself, and they would not hesitate to use it if threatened. The galaxy would have peace, but it would be peace on humanity's terms. The demonstration that followed left no doubt about human capabilities. Amy Carter had prepared a small device that could manipulate matter at the quantum level. With a simple gesture, she transformed a chunk of ordinary rock into a perfect crystal structure that sang with harmonic frequencies. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as she reshaped reality with nothing more than focused thought. The reaction was immediate and polarized. Some species welcomed humanity's return and offered to submit to their leadership. Others were terrified by the implications of such advanced technology and began planning resistance movements. A few tried to maintain neutrality, but everyone understood that the old galactic order was finished forever. Chris Bennett commanded the fleet operations that secured critical systems throughout the galaxy. Human ships appeared simultaneously in dozens of locations and began dismantling Zephyrian strongholds with surgical precision. The enemy forces were completely overwhelmed by technology they could not understand or counter. Entire fleets surrendered without firing a shot when they realized the futility of resistance. The liberation of occupied worlds revealed the true extent of Zephyrian brutality. Helen Murphy led the humanitarian teams that provided medical aid to millions of enslaved beings. Many of the survivors had been subjected to genetic modifications that turned them into living tools for resource extraction. Human biotechnology was the only thing advanced enough to reverse the damage and restore their original forms. Steve Patterson oversaw the construction of relief stations throughout the liberated territories. The stations used the same hybrid technology that had built humanity's underground cities. They could process raw materials into anything needed for reconstruction, and were powered by quantum energy sources that would never be exhausted. Entire civilizations were rebuilt in a matter of months. But the most remarkable achievement was not technological but social. Paul Davis led the integration teams that helped former enemies work together toward common goals. Humanity's chaotic creativity proved to be the perfect catalyst for breaking down the rigid barriers that had divided galactic society for millennia. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years found themselves collaborating on projects that benefited everyone. The Verdani homeworld became a symbol of the new galactic order. Troy Anderson established a permanent human garrison there and worked with local leaders to create a model society that other species could emulate. The planet's recovery from Zephyrian occupation was so rapid that it seemed miraculous. Within a year, it was more prosperous than it had ever been in its history. Alan Roberts coordinated the establishment of the new Galactic Union that replaced the failed assembly. Unlike the old council, this organization was built on principles of cooperation rather than domination. Every member species had a voice, but humanity's technological superiority gave them natural leadership authority. It was a benevolent hegemony that most civilizations accepted willingly. The Union's first major project was the establishment of a galaxy-spanning communication network that used quantum entanglement to enable instant communication across any distance. Rebecca Stone led the technical teams that installed the quantum relays throughout known space. The network connected every inhabited system and made the galaxy feel smaller and more unified than ever before. Karen Phillips worked on the cultural integration programs that helped different species understand and appreciate each other's unique contributions. Humanity's biological interface technology allowed for direct mind-to-mind communication that eliminated the misunderstandings that had caused so many conflicts in the past. For the first time in galactic history, true empathy was possible between different species. The former Zephyrian territories were transformed into productive worlds that contributed to galactic prosperity, rather than draining it through conquest. The Zephyrians themselves were not exterminated, but were given extensive biological modifications that suppressed their aggressive instincts. Many of them became productive members of galactic society and helped repair the damage their empire had caused. But perhaps the most important change was philosophical. The galaxy had spent millennia trying to achieve stability through rigid order and predictable behavior. Humanity's return demonstrated that chaos and creativity were not obstacles to overcome but tools to be harnessed. The unpredictability that had once made humans dangerous now made them invaluable as problem solvers and innovators. The quarantine barrier around Earth was finally deactivated after serving its purpose for 2 centuries. Jake Morrison stood once again at the observation deck of Luna Station and watched as the energy field dissolved into nothingness. But this time he was not watching humanity's imprisonment begin. He was witnessing their triumphant emergence as the leaders of galactic civilization. The irony was not lost on anyone. The punishment that was meant to contain humanity's dangerous nature had instead given them the time and freedom to transcend their limitations. They had used their isolation to forge themselves into something extraordinary. The species that had once been too chaotic for galactic society had become its saviors and guides. As trade ships from dozens of worlds approached Earth for the first time in 2 centuries, Amy Carter reflected on the journey her species had taken. They had begun as crude explorers who made diplomatic mistakes through ignorance and inexperience. They had evolved into wise guardians who used their advanced technology to protect and nurture life throughout the galaxy. The transformation was complete. Humanity had fulfilled its potential and claimed its rightful place among the stars. The galaxy would never again know the chaos and violence that had characterized the previous centuries. Under human leadership, it would enter a golden age of peace and prosperity that would last for millennia to come. The extraordinary thing they had built during their isolation was not just technology but wisdom. And that wisdom would guide the galaxy toward a brighter future than anyone had dared to imagine.